Welcome to another podcast of the Patriotic Pulpit. I am Bill Lockwood. I want us to think about what we might call simply the false doctrine of judicial supremacy, the error of judicial supremacy. And that is defined simply as that somehow the court system can override the executive branch and tell the executive branch what to do, what not to do, and specifically speaking about the illegal alien from Maryland that had been deported, Abrego Garcia. Now the Supreme Court, or at least I should say that district courts and district court judges are seeking to override the Constitution and the constitutional system and the executive branch by telling Donald Trump that they must bring back Abrego Garcia. This is absolutely a falsehood. But what concerns me more is the fact that the executive branch continues to rely upon what the Supreme Court may say regarding this particular case. I don't think that I've heard but hundreds of times, not just once, but hundreds of times, and I don't watch television all day long and I don't watch the news consistently, but I've heard so many times the statement made that we will wait to see what happens at the Supreme Court. The conservatives are putting all of their eggs in one judicial basket, and that is what the Supreme Court is going to say regarding the deportation of not only Garcia, but also the deportation of the masses of illegals that have come here, and whether or not they're going to have the rights of a fair and judicious trial, and whether they're going to be able to have access to judges in courts. This is what we've come to in America? This is absolutely atrocious, and I believe the atrocity violating the Constitution of the United States. So let's first of all begin, and I'm going to point out this. I believe, just as Andrew Jackson said regarding the Supreme Court, this is the Supreme Court's opinion. These are the district judge had told him at one point that he needed to do certain things when he was down in New Orleans, and he said that's the court's opinion. Now let them enforce it. That's exactly what I believe the Trump administration needs to do, because the precedent is being set that the judges, black-robed judges, are actually the dictators, the oligarchy that Bernie Sanders likes to talk about, the oligarchy. This is really the oligarchy that is setting up in America. So let's first of all begin the story with the news reports regarding the Salvadoran illegal alien, Abrego Garcia. Now, it should embarrass these far left, these socialist democratic senators such as Chris Van Hollen, and those who follow him to El Salvador to secure his release. He is now confined in El Salvador, but Chris Van Hollen goes down there and sought to release or have him released back to America. The embarrassing thing is, not only is he an illegal alien, and the Democrats are siding with illegals in a country. This is absolutely astounding. It is overturning law and order in our country. The Tennessee Highway Patrol, several years ago, detained Garcia, whom the Democrats claim was wrongly deported, and suspected him of human trafficking. This was the Tennessee Highway Patrol. This is according to the Tennessee Star. They disclosed it a couple of years ago. President Joe Biden stepped in and his FBI ordered Garcia released into the country. Garcia's vehicle, when stopped by the Tennessee Highway Patrol, was packed with 7 passengers. As well, Fox News obtained more details about his domestic violence case. The handwritten note from his wife, Jennifer Vasquez, depicts Garcia as a brutal wife beater. That is bad optics, to say the least, for Van Hollen and the Democrats, but they don't care because illegal aliens are the top priority to the Democratic Party. If you're a Democrat, I'm ashamed of you. I'm ashamed because, as one top Democrat said, illegal aliens are, quote, the people we care about the most. Ladies and gentlemen, this is overturning the Democratic Party, seeking to overturn the entire constitutional system that we have led by people such as Chris Van Hollen. So, booted back to El Salvador on March 15th, as one person writes, Garcia has become the hill upon which the Democrats want to die. They claim he was wrongly deported. As well, they believe the Trump administration has unlawfully defied a ruling of the Supreme Court that supposedly ordered his return. As we will see, that's not what the Supreme Court had to say, but let's take their thinking on the subject, and that is the courts have ordered the Trump administration to return Garcia to the United States. Now, Van Hollen traveled to El Salvador to demand his release. It's kind of almost humorous if it is not so serious, but the government of President Bukele wisely told him to pound sand. That is, told Van Hollen, no, get out of here. Van Hollen warned the President Bukele of El Salvador that other Democrats are going to follow. He said, I may be the first member of Congress here, but I can assure you more will be coming. This is absolutely an atrocity that Democrats are so interested in an illegal alien who should not have been in this country in the first place, but they want to give him fair trial and a hearing, the rights of a court system. It's absolutely stunning. But not only so, Van Hollen now and other Garcia fangirls, as one person wrote, coming to El Salvador, that is senators, congresswomen from the United States going to El Salvador, and they're going to deal with apparently the same revelation that Van Hollen received. The state highway patrolman that had stopped Garcia initially, quote, for an unknown reason on December 6, 2022, according to the Tennessee Star, and that the Highway Patrol in Tennessee, the officer responsible for the stop, immediately discovered that Abrego Garcia was transporting 7 passengers with 8 individuals inside the vehicle. Garcia was driving without a valid driver's license. That is not uncommon with illegal aliens. In Tennessee, the crime is a misdemeanor punished by fine and jail time. But here's what the Tennessee Star wrote about that traffic stop. Something about the traffic stop caused concern in the mind of the highway patrol officer in Tennessee that the law enforcement agencies should be alerted. One source told the Star that the Tennessee Highway Patrol ultimately discovered Abrego Garcia was on a terrorist watch list, but could not locate Abrego Garcia with a deportation list. Another source told the Star that the Tennessee Highway Patrol did not discover Abrego Garcia on a terrorist watch list, but that another one of the 7 passengers in the vehicle may have been from a terrorist watch list himself. So when the Highway Patrol called the FBI told the cops to photograph the vehicle's occupants and record its contents, and the Star continues the report this way. Once the photographs were captured, the source told the Star, that the FBI requested the Tennessee Highway Patrol released all 8 individuals and that the THP, the Tennessee Highway Patrol officers, complied with the request. The Star learned also that the circumstances of the stop made the Highway Patrol officer responsible for the stop concerned that Abrego Garcia was engaged in human trafficking, but that Abrego Garcia and his passengers were nonetheless released at the request of the FBI. All right, let's just stop and gather up the strings so far of the story, and that is Abrego Garcia, in this country illegally, identified on a terrorist watch list, or at least occupants of his car were, without a driver's license, violating the law of the United States, which in Tennessee gets jail time, and yet the FBI told the Tennessee Highway Patrol to release the passengers and to release Garcia. The Star knows the identity of the officer, but they're withholding the information. Garcia, sources told the Star, was transporting 7 passengers from Texas to Maryland. An obvious conclusion about the passengers, like Garcia, they were, all of them, illegal aliens. They should not have been in this country to begin with. The court document also shows that Garcia is a wife beater. Aside from the unwelcome news The Garcia fan club, which is the Democrats in Congress, they know that he is a wife beater, but they are not telling the story. Domestic violence case. His wife, Jennifer Vasquez, points out that he has been a wife abuser. And there's a GoFundMe page in which they want to support Garcia. In August 2020, he socked his wife in the eye and left a purple shiner, she alleges. This is November 2020. He bashed her with a work boot, the complaint alleged. May 4th, 2021. She told cops, I was watching on my laptop. He yelled to turn it off. I told him I wasn't sleepy. He got angry, reached over and shut and threw my laptop on the floor, and the baby started to cry because he was putting pressure on him. My immediate reaction was to push him off of us. Then he scratched me in the left eye, leaving me bleeding. And her reports, or police reports, are all online. You can read it yourself. But Garcia wasn't finished. Later that day, the distraught Vasquez, his wife, reported, an angry Garcia ripped her clothes off. He chased her as she fled to the bathroom. He grabbed her arm, she alleged, and I have marks on my left arm as well. She continues, I'm afraid to be close to him. I've had multiple photos and videos of how violent he can be and all the bruises he has left on me. But the GoFundMe website reports Kilmar is an excellent father. And they say that he needs to be brought back to see his life partner, Vasquez. Now, this is exactly who the Democrats are funding and supporting. It is absolutely stunning to me that we have this going on in America. But not only this going on in America, but that the Democrats are willing to defend him and bring him back to the United States because he was deported, they say, unlawfully to El Salvador. So I want to go back to the basic underlying issues regarding all of this. And that is to say that the Constitution crushes the myth of judicial supremacy. This is an article written in the New American by Joel Wolverton, March 13th of this year. This is a stunning display, he tells us, of judicial overreach, and yea, verily, that is exactly the truth. A federal judge in California has attempted to override the constitutional authority of the President of the United States. And by the way, there are many of the federal judges that are trying to do so. On Thursday, U.S. District Judge William Alsup, sitting in San Francisco, ordered 6 executive agencies to reinstate thousands of employees recently dismissed as part of President Donald Trump's lawful efforts to restore accountability and efficiency in the federal workforce. But here is a federal judge sitting in San Francisco, binding the Department of Defense, binding the Veterans Affairs, binding the Department of Agriculture, binding the Department of Energy, binding the Department of Interior and the Treasury and the executive branch, as if a single unelected judge, a jurist, can dictate the internal operations of the executive branch. And that's exactly what's happening regarding illegal aliens being deported by Donald Trump also. I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is the oligarchy that Bernie Sanders and AOC need to be thinking about. The oligarchy that unelected judges might override the executive branch in the United States. I want to make one thing absolutely clear. No federal judge, nor even a panel of them, not 9 judges sitting at the Supreme Court, has the constitutional authority to override, countermand, or nullify a lawful order issued by the President of the United States directed at the officers within the executive branch. That assertion is not up for debate. It is a matter of constitutional design, historical precedent, and the plain language of the founding charter of the Constitution. That is, the Constitution being our founding charter. The Constitution, Wolverton writes, does not create 3 equal branches of government. It creates 3 distinct branches, each supreme within its own sphere. And that is really the bottom line, within its own sphere. The executive branch is not a mere administrative errand boy for the federal judiciary. It has co-equal power, and in many ways, given its unitary and energetic structure, was designed to be the most vigorous defender of the people's liberty against the legislative overreach and judicial arrogance. That's the executive branch. But today, thanks to constitutional and legal ignorance, civic apathy, we have come to believe that the 9 robed judges at the Supreme Court level, or the district judges dressed in black, form an oligarchy, and the federal benches in this country wave a gavel and they can paralyze the President of the United States. This is the constitutional heresy that we are facing. So let's set the record straight, shall we? Number 1, the executive power is vested in the President, and it is not shared with judges. Article 2, Section 1 is crystal clear. The executive branch shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. That's not a suggestion. That's not even a partial grant. That is exclusive vesting. It kind of reminds me, you might remember many years ago, ABC had an anchor, Ted Koppel. Ted Koppel had a speech that he went to a college, and I forget which the college was. But he said one of the problems in America is that we think the 10 commandments of God are 10 suggestions. The 10 commandments are found in Exodus chapter 20, Deuteronomy chapter 5. And he pointed out these are 10 commandments, and they're not the 10 suggestions. But that's the way people treat them. These are the 10 suggestions. So also regarding Article 2 of the Constitution, regarding the constitutional authority given to the executive branch, this is his commandment. That is, it's not a suggestion, it's not a partial grant, it is an exclusive vesting. All executive authority flows from a single office. Every officer in every executive agency, from the Secretary of the State to the clerk of the Department of Agriculture, serves at the pleasure of the President and operates under his constitutional authority, and judges can indeed go pound sand. No federal judge, not even the entire Supreme Court, can legally issue a binding directive to an executive officer contrary to the President's lawful order. That would violate the structural principle of separation of powers. If an executive officer disobeys the President in favor of a court's injunction, he is insubordinate, he is not obedient. This is the problem with not only the Pam Bondis of the world and bless their hearts, all of the people in the executive branch saying we will obey what the Supreme Court tells us, and they're putting all of their eggs in the Supreme Court basket. That is wrong. They need to be like Andrew Jackson and say, that's their opinion. These federal judges, that's their opinion, and let them enforce it. They cannot exercise authority over the executive branch of the United States government. It does not depend upon what the Supreme Court says. And all the judges telling the executive branch to bring back all of the illegals or not to send out the illegals any longer, that is absolutely wrong. It is a myth. Number 2, the judiciary is not a supervisory board over the executive. Nowhere in Article 3 is the federal judiciary given supervisory authority over the executive branch. Wolverton writes, and that is exactly correct. The courts have one core function, to decide cases and controversies properly brought before them. They don't rule the government. A case has to be brought before them. And let me note this as well. They are only the authority in the matters of the primaries that are brought before the court. They can only tell what the primaries, that is those who are bringing the case before them, what they should do, how to apply the law to those individuals coming before the court. They interpret the law in context of specific disputes between parties. That's it. That's all. Judicial orders have no power unless they are backed by execution. But who executes federal orders? That's the executive branch. That's why they call it the executive branch. If a court order contradicts an executive order within the president's lawful domain, who prevails? Constitutionally, the answer is obvious, the executive, because the judge has neither the sword nor the authority to wield it. Alexander Hamilton himself made the distinction clear in Federalist number 78, stating that the judiciary has no influence over either the sword or the purse. The sword or the purse. The sword is the executive branch. The purse is the legislative branch. Alexander Hamilton, Federalist number 78, states that the Supreme Court or the judiciary has no influence over the sword, that is, the executive branch, or the purse, the legislative branch. We have gone far afield, constitutionally speaking, for many, many years. I remember when Obamacare was crammed through and everybody waited with bated breath. I heard Megyn Kelly on television say this statement, and I like Megyn Kelly. I think she's a great commentator, a great lawyer, a great conservative commentator, but here's where the conservatives have made a huge and an Achilles heel mistake, and that is, we're going to wait, she said, to see whether Obamacare is constitutional or not. No, we are not going to wait. We know it's not constitutional. I can read the Constitution for myself. I know it's unconstitutional. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says. Point number 3. Historic practice proves the point. I want you to consider how George Washington governed. Would the federal courts have dared issue an injunction against his orders? Would Thomas Jefferson have allowed a single judge to block his executive decisions? Matter of fact, I saw a post the other day on Facebook, and I thought it was pretty humorous, and that is, how about Abraham Lincoln? I have a statue of him right here behind me over my left shoulder. He and George Washington. Abraham Lincoln issued the executive order regarding, that's right, the Emancipation Proclamation. I wonder if he should have let Roger Taney, that is, of the Supreme Court, issue an injunction against him saying, no, you can't do that. No, that's illegal. I wonder what Abraham Lincoln would have said. We know what he would have said, and we know what the people today would say. We know what all the minority communities would say today, if indeed they would, if we go back and say, well, Abraham Lincoln was unlawful in that, and the Supreme Court could have said, no, you can't do that. Chief Justice John Marshall, during Thomas Jefferson's time, tried to expand judicial supremacy in Marbury versus Madison, but Jefferson flatly rejected the notion that the courts could bind the executive in all matters. He wrote this: to consider the judges as ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions is a very dangerous doctrine indeed. It would place us under despotism of an oligarchy. There we have the same word. Bernie Sanders loves to say it. Bernie Sanders doesn't know what it means. AOC doesn't know how to spell it, and that's exactly what's going on here. Matter of fact, listen to what Thomas Jefferson had to say regarding the oligarchy of the Supreme Court or the court system. He says the courts cannot override the executive branch, and here's how he put it. At the establishment of our constitutions, the judiciary bodies were supposed to be the most helpless and harmless members of the government. Helpless and harmless members of our government. Experience, however, soon showed in what way they were to become the most dangerous. What is that? What is that, Master Jefferson? That the insufficiency of the means provided for the removal gave them a freehold and irresponsibility of office, that their decisions, seeming to concern individual suitors only, that is, just what we said a moment ago, the individual suitors coming before a court, the court has authority only over those suitors, period, that's it. Seeming to concern individual suitors only, pass silent and unheeded by the public at large, that these decisions somehow nevertheless become law by precedent, sapping by little and little the foundations of the Constitution, and working its change by construction before anyone has perceived that invisible and helpless worm has been busily employed in consuming its substance. That is, the worm he's talking about is the Supreme Court, consuming little by little. In truth, man is not made to be trusted for life if secured against all liability to account. That is to simply say that the Supreme Court or the judicial branch has not, and even if it tries to take it, it has not the authority over the executive branch. He goes on, one single object, that is, proposed code of laws, one single object, if your code of laws attains it, will entitle you to the endless gratitude of society, that of restraining judges from usurping legislation. And with no body of men is this restraint more wanting than with the judges of what is commonly called our general government, but what I call our foreign department. That is to say, simply, the judges cannot override the executive branch. They are not the end all in the constitutional construction of things. Abraham Lincoln, also, though not yet president when the Supreme Court issued its infamous Dred Scott versus Stanford decision in 1857, in which they said what? Blacks were not citizens. They were not citizens of the United States, and they had not recourse to the rights of citizens. He immediately recognized, Lincoln did, the constitutional danger that it posed. He refused to accept the idea that a court ruling, no matter how sweeping, could fix the policy of an entire nation. He later declared it this way: if the policy of the federal government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers. That is exactly right. If we have to wait for the Supreme Court to make a decision on what the executive branch is doing, they may offer their opinion, but to stop him or to give him the go-ahead, the green light, then we have an oligarchy already in place, and the people have ceased to be their own rulers. That's pretty strong, isn't it? Let's go to number 4. The Constitution's defense is the executive's duty. It is the duty of Donald Trump to defend the Constitution. That's what he took the oath to do. One of the most grotesque modern lies is the idea that if a judge says stop, the entire executive branch must sit down and obey. Nonsense! The president takes an oath to preserve, protect, defend the Constitution of the United States, not to serve as the court's errand boy. That means if a court issues an unconstitutional order or presumes to seize executive authority, the president not only may refuse to comply, but he is bound by oath to do so. Defending the separation of powers is not optional. It is the chief executive's constitutional obligation. Number 5, judicial tyranny must be rejected. If we're going to remain a free people, or if we're going to retain or regain some of the freedoms that we have lost so much of, and everybody knows that after April 15th, just the other day, we must reject judicial tyranny. So Joel Wolverton writes this way, and correctly so: we must be blunt. What we're witnessing today is not the rule of law. It's the rule by lawless judges. A rogue judge issues a nationwide injunction against a lawful presidential directive, and the media and the bureaucrats fall in line as though a new commandment has just descended from Mount Sinai. It has not. It is legal fiction, and a dangerous fiction at that. No judge can lawfully tell the president how to direct his subordinates. No judge can lawfully command the executive branch. No judge can lawfully override a presidential order unless that order violates a constitutional prohibition, and even then, only within the scope of a specific case involving actual litigants, not issuing a nationwide injunction. We've allowed the judiciary to transgress its constitutional bounds, and now we're reaping the consequences, ladies and gentlemen. Lawless courts acting like kings, spineless executives surrendering the rightful authority, and this must end. President Trump, Pam Bondi, the entire executive branch, Marco Rubio, everyone must stand up against the unlawful seizure of oligarchical power by these rogue judges. A single federal judge cannot override a presidential order directed to the executive branch. Not constitutionally, not historically, not logically. The president is not subordinate to the judiciary, and no serious student of American government or the Constitution can pretend otherwise. Judicial supremacy is a myth. Dangerous, corrosive, unconstitutional myth. And it's time to call it what it is. It's tyranny by a black robe. If we have surviving liberty, or if liberty itself is to survive, we must reassert the original design. The president must govern the executive branch. The courts must stick to their own cases. And people must remember that their freedom does not rest on judicial permission slips. It rests on constitutional fidelity.